Good evening. Welcome to the Carl Rominger Show here on Rominger Radio. The talk line number is 717-916-5198. That's 717-916-5198. You want to talk about something, you might know what the topics are, feel free to call in. Obviously, we're going to try to get some calls so we can discuss things. Otherwise, I just have to do a really long monologue, which I'm prepared to do if I have to. There's this fella, Krugman, who writes for the New York Times. Most recently got hired to do a... what was it? Something on class, bringing up the lower classes. So this guy who gets paid, I think, $200,000 a year by NYU or City University of New York to consult on trying to eliminate class warfare, writes for the New York Times. And I've said before, if you follow me on Facebook, that I do read Krugman regularly because 99% of the time I want to know what the enemy has to say. And 1% of the time he convinces me of something. So, of course, I did this whole show on global warming, talked quite extensively about it on Sunday night's show. And Krugman now has a little piece coming out in the New York Times, and I think it was in today's Penn Live and local paper here in Carlisle, the Sentinels, today as well. And he's calling it crazy climate economics, and he's basically saying that we can expect, and I'll read this little excerpt from here. So the coming firestorm over new power plant regulations won't be a genuine debate, just as there isn't a genuine debate about climate science. Instead, the airwaves will be filled with conspiracy theories and wild claims about costs, all of which should be ignored. Climate policy may finally be getting somewhere. Let's not let crazy climate economics get in the way. Well, that's one of the things I posited. And if you want to talk about this, by the way, it's 717-916-5189. I switched out the laptop that we used last week. So I think Skype will work a lot better this week. So if you tried to call in, I know we missed a bunch of calls because Skype was not picking them up right. Feel free to call in 717-916-5189, and we'll get you on the air here. Anyhow, Krugman basically, was going the opposite direction as me because I'm saying, why should we be changing our entire economy? Why should we be reworking our entire economy if we don't know whether or not human beings are responsible for the changing climate? And if we are responsible for the changing climate, will removing our level of responsibility change anything? So if you want to listen to last week's show, that'll kind of get you where you want to go on it and show you what I was talking about. But basically, I'm saying, yeah, you do have to do an economic analysis. Another rational thing is, people drive down the highway at 55 miles an hour. And if we all drove slower, there would be less deaths on the highway. But at the end of the day, we have to have some level of efficiency or the economy won't flow. If you could drive 5 miles an hour, you would get to Harrisburg, in about 4 hours, right? Most people depend on the fact that they can commute in the area in less than an hour or maybe an hour and a half. But the point is, you can cover 20, 30 miles or more in less than an hour, except for those little endpoints before you get on the highway and off. Those are the ones that always snag me. But as you understand what I'm saying, you could do an analysis and say, we will save the world and so many lives by lowering the speed limit. But we'd have to look at the productivity cost. One of the things that they keep talking about with climate change is this newest report from NASA about a glacier. And, of course, I actually went and read NASA's press release, which I posted the link to on my Facebook page. And NASA does not say that this has anything to do with global warming or climate change. That's all the mainstream press coming out, or as Rush calls it, the drive-by media, coming out with that headline saying, past the point of no return on the glacier. Well, they don't say whether the origins of that are related to climate change whatsoever, but let's assume for a moment that it even is. It says that the sea level will rise 4 feet over the next 200 years, give or take. Well, a 4-foot rise in sea level would be catastrophic. On the other hand, if it happens over 2 centuries, you've got plenty of time to adapt to it. Number 2, you've got plenty of time to see what happens and make sure that it's actually going to happen before you suddenly adopt a radical change to our lifestyle or our economy. And number 3, that's assuming that a rise in the sea level is all bad. There are some areas in the world which would benefit from that. So it's not that simple to simply say it's bad, therefore we must do something about it. It has to be, how fast will it happen? How bad will it be? Can we adapt to it? And will warming climates, for instance, allow for the growing of crops in areas that traditionally have been arid or otherwise unable to support crops? In fact, I'm told from what I read that there's a lot of people in Greenland where glacial retreat has now made it truly green in some areas that are enjoying farming land that hasn't been farmed in centuries. Oh, yeah, by the way, it used to be green as well. That's why the Vikings called it Greenland. And because it was, in fact, a viable, usable piece of land at that time period. Anyhow, long story short, you can see where I'm going with this. We do have to have cost-benefit analysis, but what the left is telling us and what the crazy climate people are telling us is, don't worry about that. We're beyond that point. We just need to act now. Anytime somebody tells you need to act now, whether they're a Tea Party member, a Republican, a Democrat, your president, your radio host, whoever, when they tell you have to act now, you should always be a little suspicious. Most things don't require immediate action and actually work out better upon reflection. I don't know if that's true if your house is on fire, but still, even then stopping and thinking about which way to go out the house might pay off in the long run. Okay, 717-916-5189. I want to get you guys here on the air if you want to talk about any of our topics today. I also posted a little piece about Russia today. I have a theory about Russian aggression and why Russia is as aggressive as it is in recent years. There was a collapse in Russian society a number of years ago. So if you all remember the Soviet Union, after it collapsed, there was a population collapse, a health crisis, and we'll talk about what else is going on in Russia now that's contributing to a population situation. So in fact, the population in Russia continued to decline all the way through 2009. So I want you to think about this. From like 1993 or somewhere in there, or 91, almost 18 years, the population was going down. Now, in the last couple of years, it started to creep up, mainly fueled by very liberal immigration policies. And what do I mean by very liberal immigration policies? I mean the Russians are basically inviting anybody and anybody who wants to come to Russia. So you want to move there and you have some ethnic tie. You want to move there and you have some argument why you may have some historical interest or family member, very liberal to allow you to come into the country because they're trying to repopulate. Now, they've also embraced religion. The average Russian woman was expected years ago to have 3.5 abortions in her lifetime. That has fallen dramatically down to, I think, 1.5 to 2. And that's also because of an embrace of the idea of have children. But here's their current problem. The childbearing age of the women are getting older and having less children, and there's not enough replacements. The men have this is amazing, an average life expectancy of about 61 years. Compared to the rest of the Western world, that is just absolutely astronomically different than what we all expect or experience in our lifetimes. Well, even more compounding of that is 1 in 4 Russian males will die before the age of 55. Fully 25%. In the United States, Britain, somewhere around 5 or 7%. So when you think about that, they lose a lot of productive working-age citizens. They also had a problem for lack of vaccinations back in the 90s, where lots of people were lost to diphtheria. They had a few other public health crises, which killed off people who were in that golden range, where they were going to begin childbearing soon and would also be good workforce. So I believe that Russia is behind the 8 ball on human capital. What do I mean by that? They don't have a workforce ready. They don't have young people coming up in the ranks that are going to be able to grow the population and support the economy. Here in the United States, a lot of baby boomers are going to retire, and what they're going to be expecting is that young people, myself, yourself maybe included, who are going to be working for another 20, 25 years, are going to be paying into Social Security to keep it solvent so that they can collect their benefits. Well, in countries like Russia and Japan has faced a similar problem as well. As people get older and the population ages and you don't replace with a young workforce, if you have all pensioners and no earners, you end up with a problem. So, as again, Russia's been trying to repopulate. Well, unfortunately, because of this hole they have in their demographics, their population is going to again begin to fall despite all this stuff they've done. And probably by 2020, it's going to fall lower than it has been, and they don't expect it to get up to current levels again until about 2025. And that's optimistic if everything goes right. So what's the only other way you can grow your population? If you've liberalized your immigration policy, if you've upped your fertility rates as best you can amongst the people who will be able to have babies, but your population is still aging and becoming decrepit on you, and your men are drinking themselves literally to death and dying at an astronomically high rate before they reach the age of 55, and taking themselves right out of the workforce, what do? Well, you look around and you say, well, the Ukraine is in turmoil. And by the way, if you want to get in on this conversation, have any commentary about how you think our president's reacted to the Russian crisis, we'll talk about that. 717-916-5189. Again, if you want to jump on and talk about that, be happy to have you on. 716-5189. So I have to learn this number because I always want to say one of the other numbers that we used to say. Anyhow, long story, jump on and we'll talk about it because they've now got this population crisis. So you go to the Ukraine, you look around and you say, oh my goodness, these guys are completely without a government for the moment. I think I'll take some of them. So first comes the Crimea and the traditional Russian regions. And they have a lot of reason to go out and grab people from those areas because they are loyal or sympathetic potentially to Russian ownership or leadership. So they're going to do that. They've hit up Georgia. Estonia's in the sights potentially. You've got a whole sphere of influence, of old Russian influence, that they're probably going to begin to try to take back over. This will help them solve their economic crisis. Ukraine also, however, is sort of the energy basket of the world in some respects as well, because even though Russia has plenty of oil and gas, a lot of it has to be shipped through the Ukraine to get it to markets like Europe, and the same with Chinese energy conduits. So as a result, Ukraine also is a big prize for those purposes as well. So while Russia doesn't need the natural resources of the Ukraine per se, it can use them, but it can also use it as a line of transmission for natural gas, oil, and other things. So that will greatly aid the Russian state. So the next question is, well, why? What can we do to stop them? And my positing in my article is nothing, because when a nation state decides that it's being strangled or that it needs something or is truly without a resource, it will act out rationally to try to procure that resource. So Imperial Japan is the example I used because the Japanese looked around and they realized that the modern economy was going to run on petrochemicals, oil, gas, minerals, and realized that the homeland did not have a lot of those things, if any, and could not supply the population and the kind of economic projections that the Japanese wanted. So prior to World War II, the Japanese started looking around. And, of course, China and mainland Asia looked very tempting, so they ultimately invaded. And the whole purpose of Pearl Harbor was not really an attack on the United States for purposes of taking over the United States. The original intention was to attack the boats in Pearl Harbor, sink them, and prevent the U.S. from getting over there to interfere in Japanese war of aggression. And so while we got involved for that reason, we were sort of kind of a side note in the strictest sense that they weren't really going after us in the moment. They really more wanted to secure minerals, resources, oil, and things they needed for industrial purposes, and also to, in which they did do, create slave labor forces out of Chinese peasants. So there, we can go into the moral aspects of it, but what I'm trying to point out is that the Japanese nation state looked around and said, we need to secure certain things to be a member of the world economy, and that's what we're going to do. And we're going to do it, everybody be damned. And so I believe Russia's in the same position now. Russia's in the position where they look around and they say, we need people. We need to solve our population crisis. We're not going to solve it in the next 10, 15 years. And it is dire. And we're not going to improve the health of our men overnight. And we're not going to get enough women of childbearing age overnight. But we certainly can import those people. And I think that's why you're not going to see that slow down in the Ukraine. So 717-916-5189 is the talk line number if you want to call in and join us. Again, 717-916-5189. And we'll see what you guys have to say about these things. I'm also kind of interested in the, what do I want to say? I'm also kind of interested in what's been going on. Let's find my notes here. In the car search area, and I posted something about that a while back. About 300 people had listened to that ditty. Maybe I can play that for you a little later rather than chime on about it. But the Pennsylvania Supreme Court has allowed police to use simple probable cause to search your car without a warrant. Brings us in line with the federal rule and a lot of other states but it's sort of saying, well, the Pennsylvania Constitution used to be special, but it's not as special as it once was. So we're not going to grant you the special protections that we always thought you were entitled to. So I'm not completely thrilled to death with that aspect of it. On the other hand, I guess the fact that we're going back to the same position as the rest of the world when it comes to how we're going to handle things means it's not fundamentally different. So perhaps it's not something that we have to worry about as immensely as I would think at first glance. But I still do believe that Pennsylvania should recognize a stronger constitution, as we historically have. So if you want to talk about that topic, again, 717-916-5189. And also I want to thank everybody for the feedback, because I got a lot of positive feedback from Sunday's show. I feel bad for the callers who didn't make it through because of our technical difficulties. But, hey, we were able to overcome those, so hopefully we will again tonight. Once we get a call here, we'll know if the Skype's up and running. So if anybody wants to be the first guinea pig to make sure it's working, 717-916-5189. The other thing that's going on, by the way, that's kind of a liberties issue, CDL drivers, they're changing the medical requirements again, and it's now going to be much harder to get your CDL if you have a medical problem. So things like diabetes and sleep apnea are going to become potentially banning you from carrying a CDL license, and the new regulations take effect here in May. And medical cards are only good for 2 years. So anytime somebody gets their medical card updated, and I'm not sure if everybody's going to have to update them right away or it's going to be grandfathered in, but it's kind of scary if you own a CDL and you drive for a living, knowing that you could lose your livelihood overnight because somebody doesn't feel you're sufficiently how good. Caller, you're on the air.
How are you doing tonight?
Good. What's going on?
I just called to see and make sure all your devices are working properly.
They seem to be. Anything you want to talk about while I got you?
Well, I saw a couple of postings. I think maybe you posted this, but it's not what you were talking about.
Oh no, go ahead.
But that bouncy house that floated away, so to speak. The thing I wanted to comment on that, and I thought it was kind of funny. It just made me think of the way you were approaching global warming.
Right.
It is such a big hype. I mean, obviously it's a story. It's an interesting story. But every time you look at that story up about the bouncy house and you read it, all they want to do is say, well, the injuries have quadrupled since this year, and that. I mean, it's just everything is crisis.
Okay, so let me bring the other listeners up here, right? Because nothing sells a story better than the crisis, and you're right. So if you go to my Facebook page, I've got a picture of a bouncy house. Now, it was a little bit of a tragedy. So first of all, there's a bouncy house and there's an apartment complex, and the kids are playing on it, and a gust of wind picks the bouncy house up into the sky, and witnesses claim it went as high as 50 feet in the air, but there was a little girl who fell out low on the ground and two little boys who fell out, one who landed on a car in a parking lot and broke his arms and his jaw and his legs and his spleen, and then the other kid who landed straight in a parking lot and who has some kind of serious head trauma. So who knows how they're going to, how the girl apparently is fine, but the two boys are obviously in rough medical shape. And what a nightmare,
Right.
1 minute your little kid's bouncing in the house and the next minute it's blown away. They say it was staked, but right, so you read the article and it launches right into the fact that once every 46 minutes some kid is presenting in an emergency room with a bouncy house injury. Well, right. I guess, and my son actually was bouncing in a bouncy house recently, and another little boy jumped on his knee and his knee bothered him for a day. And I chalk it up to, well, I guess we could take him off of playgrounds and we could prevent him from running around the yard. I don't see the bouncy house as particularly any more dangerous, except that, you got a bunch of little kids in motion. But even tonight, he went out and played soccer tonight from 5 o'clock to 5:30, where, 15 little kids are running around in motion and bumping into each other and knocking each other over and knocking heads. And that presents injuries. So, right, but you have to write the article like a bouncy house is a dangerous device.
Right, and like you said, I mean, obviously it's a sad story. Hopefully they're okay, but it just struck me that everything that happens now, everything is a crisis. Everything is, to get the attention and to get like, oh my God, what are we going to do now? This is, and there's going to be regulations now that have to be put on this, on these bouncy houses, I'm sure, and it just seems like so many things are like that. And like you said, that, obviously we can never protect our kids, and, we'd love to, but, you can't not have them go on a playground. You can't not have them do this. So
let me tell you what a bad father I am. I saw my son. We were down at Boiling Springs at the lake when he was 2, and it was pretty cold out still. It was still early spring, so the lake hadn't really warmed up if it ever warms up, but the air temperature was a little cool. And I kept telling him to stay away from the edge of the water, and of course he kept not obeying me. And then he went down the little boat ramp they have, and I sat on the bench and I yelled at him a couple times, and he would back up, and then he would, give me the look and go play. Well, sure enough, he fell right in the lake. And I actually let him fall in because I said, you know what, this kid's going to fall in the water. But he isn't going to fall far. He's going to fall, into 2 feet of water right there. I'm 10 feet away. I'll pluck him out, and that's what I did. And then after that, he had a new respect for water. I guess if I was a real helicopter parent, I could have, hovered over there and held his hand by the water so that when he's 6 and he's playing with some buddies and he's not with such tight supervision, they can all drown each other. Yeah.
I know exactly what you're saying, and I struggle with that just personally as a parent. You're like, oh, God, don't do that. You don't want to get hurt, But if they don't, and obviously it's, I want to say controlled hurt, you know what I mean? They're not going to get very hurt. In fact, I had a very similar incident with my daughter when she was going down a boat ramp, and I had people come over to me and say, hey, she might get hurt, and I'm like, it's okay. I'm not, she's lived 7 years. I'm going to, continue my streak, hopefully. You know what I mean?
I saw
people that everything's a crisis.
I saw a video where a woman was dragging the kid across the floor, like the AT&T store or something. And she says the kid wanted to be dragged, And, of course, somebody saw it, and they called the Children's Protective Services or Children and Youth in this state. And, of course, they got involved, and they saw the video, and they saw the mother dragging the kid across the floor, and therefore, she needed services, and the kid needed services. And I think about this all the time because my son loves to hang on my arm and have me drag him around places.
No, right. Now you have to make sure, you have to look around, make sure everyone's...
Right, because I'm
looking at what you're doing.
No, really, he likes this, and they look at you like... Yeah. But it's amazing because this is the perception. So, there's other funnier ones that you see, like when the Europeans come over here and they put their kids in the stroller and leave them outside of a restaurant, and everybody goes crazy because you can't do that. It just makes you the most horrible parent in the world, and how dare you. But culturally, they don't have any problem with that, and you can see pictures from like the Netherlands and other areas where there'll be 15 strollers lined up, or London, lined up right out in front of the restaurant while the parents sit inside and drink and eat coffee, and the kids enjoy, I guess, staring up at the sky as little ones are off to do.
Well, I think just, and the main reason why I brought that up is just like, with what you were saying before about the global warming and, what is the percentage of...
I was just greatly surprised they didn't even blame the bouncy house getting blown up on climate disruption.
Yes, I'm sure that the story is fairly new. They have to try to get their lines crossed and how they're going to connect the dots.
Strong wind probably caused by global warming. And that's another one. I pulled up this NASA story because it says, we've reached the point of no return about these glaciers. Well, what they're talking about is the flow of the glaciers. Well, one of the guys who posted on my Facebook page pointed out something really good. He's like, 20,000 years ago, the entire northern reaches were covered with glaciers, and they all slowly melted and went away. I don't think we'd say that was a bad thing. And the question is are these Antarctic glaciers that are moving or maybe disappearing, is this a natural cycle? Is this something that's been created by man? And one of the things, I looked at the NASA press release very carefully, and nowhere in there do they say it's related in any way, shape, or form. And I think the reason is because NASA is probably They're still political, but they probably said, you know what, this is not something we can say. We're only going to say what we can say about it. I'll be curious to see the actual article when it's finally published, because this was just a press release about what's coming. But it's a fairly technical release, and they basically just point out that these glaciers are thinning and going to fall into the sea, but they don't say why. But you're led to believe by the press that this is somehow related to global warming or climate change. I notice we don't hear anything about the growing glaciers.
It's definitely the wording and then the way they present it. Just like, you see the little one-liners. That's how you get your news. You get the news from the headline, the title of it. And that's what they do on the news. You're thinking, oh, well, this has to be global warming because, that's all they talk about and it has to be related. And people don't investigate. I personally, I saw the story and I just kind of didn't look into it. But, people like you or people need to read more about it to be able to understand it.
Well, and I wanted to because I get some debate points. People will debate me a little bit on Facebook, and I've got a few people on there who, they're 100% sure that global warming is real and we need to run around with our heads chopped off. And I always like to try to counter with them and say, hey, I'm going to go out and try to find out what this study says. We'll try to figure it out. I'll read about it, and we'll go from there.
Yeah.
But hey.
I've read some comments. I've read some other comments. No, what's the global warming thing, the thing that I'm not a scientist and that kind of thing, and I haven't read nearly as much as you have, but I don't understand how, because science changes so much,
right.
How they are going to say this is so definitive when the equipment that was used years ago, even when man did it, just the equipment has changed so much. I don't know if you had talked about this or someone. The equipment, and plus,
well, I'll tell you something. I'll tell you what you're onto right there. So I'll give you an example. So we know that cities have different climates than the areas around them. Okay, mm-hmm. And so cities affect the weather. And so, for instance, someone was pointing out to me, and I kind of agree. You don't see, for instance, tornadoes hit big cities, and the reason for that is that cities themselves, because of the way they change the atmosphere dynamic around them, are big enough to actually prevent generally the formation of regular tornadoes. So tornadoes want to form over rural land. That's why the trailer parks get hit, because they're in a spread out area, not in that central city with the big skyscrapers that hold the heat and change the weather. So what we've done over the years, though, is we've had all these weather stations where we're picking up different readings of weather and looking at things. Well, one of the things they have to do is they have to figure out how does urbanization change the reading. So when a town grows and gets bigger and bigger, it will get a little hotter there. And you expect that. So they've just made up an acceptable number to look at the old. So when they look at, let's say Des Moines, Iowa or something, right? And they have a number from 18-something. And they look at Buffalo, New York, and they have a number from 18-something. And they look at, Fargo, but out in a rural area. They have an old number. They'll look at the new numbers, and they'll just fudge. So there's an acceptable fudge factor as to what the increase should be. So one of the things that Michael Crichton, if you, and I really recommend people go get State of Fear and read it for no other purpose than to kind of get thinking about this the right way. When you get the numbers, one of the things he looked at was go and actually look at the climate data, and the areas where there's been no urbanization have seen no actual increase in temperature. And he thought that was interesting. And what it turns out is areas where there's been urbanization, which is a lot of areas where temperatures were recorded, there has been an increase in temperature. But that's if you use the accepted figure for adjustment. If you tweak it just a little bit, they don't really have an increase either. And so he was pointing out that a lot of the weather data has been cooked, or at least fudged in the direction that the climate fear mongers want you to believe it is, but in reality, there's been no change. And I don't think, the other thing is they haven't been able to measure, a millimeter or two of sea level rise in a century, something crazily small amount of sea level rise on average, suggesting again that even if there's been some warming, it hasn't had a meaningful impact whatsoever on sea levels, even though we keep being told that there's going to be a giant flood. So you're absolutely right. The instrumentations have changed, and the areas where the data is collected have changed, and they just fudge it which you sometimes have to do in science, but you can't. But there's rules on how to do it, and if you get down into the scientific literature, their level of certainty on these things is much different than the way the press reports it.
Oh my, yeah. Well, I mean, in that article you were talking about with the end of the world, with the end of the NASA article, when I apologize, I think I heard that on TV. I think it was like the end of a article or something like that. But they were saying about how sea levels are rising. They were talking about that, and I wish I would have listened closer, because what I got out of that is sea levels are rising.
Right.
And I just didn't, like I said, it's just a quick thing that I didn't listen to. But that's what they go for. That's what they,
At the end of the conversation, you're supposed listen. I'll bust on a Republican here for a minute. When Bush ran against Mike Dukakis, he did the Willie Horton ad. Okay, and
I'm sorry, say that again.
He ran an ad called the Willie Horton ad, and that was an advertisement that showed how this guy was released from prison and killed somebody. It was Mike Dukakis' fault. Okay, and there's a very fascinating thing you can do with the ad. You take it to a group of people and you show them the ad. And you ask them 5 or 6 questions about the ad, and they'll all answer basically the same way, because it's pretty clear. You come off the ad and you know what happened. Then you go back and you take the questions, because 80% of the people answer the questions a certain way, and you can say, okay, let's watch it now very carefully. Where did they say that? And when you're done with the ad, every conclusion that you've made based on what they told you and how they presented it. But at the end of the day, if you go back and parse the ad, they never say those things in there. And that way, they did that on purpose. A big ad agency puts this together, and they did it so that they knew that people would walk away with a certain perception and belief. But they also knew that when they were called to task on the ad as being unfair, they could parse the language of the ad and say, we never said that, we never said that, everything we said is factually true, even though it left you with a couple factually false impressions. And that's how it's done. That's how big advertising. That's why McDonald's, when they advertise you a hamburger, they don't tell you it's a really tasty burger. It's the tastiest burger ever. McDonald's is a place for good times. You can't objectively fight that. You can't go, well, Burger King burger is better. Well, McDonald's is a place for fun or good times. They message the ads a little bit differently, so that at the end of the day, they're not really telling you that their food is better than somebody else's. They're just telling you that eating there will be fun and exciting and wonderful, and your life will be better. Because you can't counter that with a logical argument on each individual fact. And it's the way ads are crafted. So when news stories are crafted for a fact, they can do all the same things.
Give the person or the viewers or the listeners what they want to get them to come back.
Right, without ever actually having said. Now, sometimes they can just blatantly lie, but if you don't blatantly lie, then you can always defend your position later. And Karl Rove might be guilty of this, because he made the comments about Hillary Clinton's brain damage.
Right.
And now he says, no, I didn't say she had brain damage. But if you look at what he said, he certainly was implying, like, hey, she might be messed up in the head, and we need to know that. But he's right. I didn't say she had brain damage. I just said, hey, what's the story there? And he said 30 days instead of 3. Well, we all make mistakes. But nonetheless, it is suspicious that she had the glasses on for people, which were prism glasses, which are used for blurry or double vision. And the kind she had were for people that they expect to recover. But she obviously had a very serious brain issue there. But he brought it up in a way, when he was teasing his audience there, that he left him with the impression it was brain damage, and he kind of got called out on it, and now he says, I didn't say that. I mean, he's right. I didn't say she had brain damage, but I think anybody listening to his statements could come to the conclusion that he was implying she might have brain damage.
That's what he was, yeah, right, yeah.
But he has plausible deniability later. That's not what I said. It's what I meant, but it's not what I said.
Yeah, it's not what I said. You can't, quote me on that.
Right, you cannot quote me on that, although I want you to, so that I can have both sides of the coin. All right, well, go ahead. Go ahead. I was going to say, go ahead.
I was just going to go off on something completely different. I didn't know if you heard about, like in the media now with so many apologies happening, what was it, one of the morning news stations, had a Cinco de Mayo, and, they were going to eat tacos and drink tequila, and then the next day they were apologizing if we offended any Mexican Americans and this and that. So, the apologies are everywhere for what people are saying, and I don't know if you heard anything about what Charles Barkley did and said. And, well, I know you said you're not much of a sports guy, but it was kind of out there.
Well, Barkley had done what? He made the facial impression. Was that where he...
No, he said, was it San Antonio? I'll have to look it up, but he was making reference to the voluptuous, and I'll say that because that was a nice word. He wasn't using those words, women in San Antonio, and he just kept going on. It was kind of like a bit, if you ask me.
Right.
It almost seemed like a setup, you know what I mean? They knew he was going to, it's him, but they knew he was going to say all this stuff. He was calling out all these women. Like I said, I believe it's in San Antonio,
well,
how big they are. But, and then, they were talking to him the next, I don't know if it's the next day or so, and he said, I am not apologizing. And I appreciated that because I thought, you know what, there's just too much of that. There's too much of people getting too offended and over every which thing.
And the next question is are the apologies even sincere? It sort of becomes this formula. I say something racist, I say something sexist, I say something that offends the Four-Leaf Clover Society or whoever, and then after that happens, I get bashed, and then I come out and I say, I am truly sorry about what happened, and there was a misunderstanding, and I'm going to go to sex rehab with Tiger Woods, and then I'll be back on tour shortly. It was one of those deals. Now, and it almost becomes formulaic, and the celebrities, particularly with their handlers, do a really good job of making it appear that they're sincere, but they never actually admit to any underlying wrong.
The only thing I think about that is, and maybe it's just me because I guess I'm a little jaded, but I never think they're sincere. I mean, and I hate to say that, but everyone says stupid stuff. I mean, everybody does, and I mean, unless you're blatantly being an a-hole, I mean,
right.
That's different. But if he's the one doing some comic bit, which he's not being serious. He's not being mean about it. He's not saying, the women in San Antonio are fat pigs or whatever. He was joking around. And if you don't know that, I don't know. I don't think he should have apologized. And I hate to hear these apologies a lot of times, unless someone's being completely honest and saying, I hate blah, 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 like some race or, whatever. They say that. Well, then if you really do want to apologize, then apologize. I can understand that. But if you're joking around or you just say something offhand, people do it. We're all humans. We all do that.
Well, you can't. Okay, you have to have the appropriate level of contrition, and you have to have the appropriate this reaction, and so while we all don't, we sort of. What was the it was because Tim Geithner came out and said, the administration told me to lie, and that's going to be in his book. Tim Geithner, who was the Secretary of the Treasury, ran the IRS and the Secret Service, he basically admits in his book that he had to lie in an interview because he was told to say something that he knew not to be true. Because they wanted him to say it and get that out to the people. They wanted a certain thing said a certain way. He was told by one of the advisors from the White House that this was a dog whistle to the Democrats to say that Social Security was not causing any of our deficits when in fact it is, but he was supposed to say it a certain way and deny that it was. And he didn't believe that to be true, but he went ahead and did what he was told. And he basically says, I was told to lie and I did. And we now know, for instance, that a little while ago, the ACLU was suing the government over these wiretaps, and the Solicitor General of the United States lied to the Supreme Court and said, we absolutely, if we're going to use any of this stuff, we always tell the defendants where we got it and disclose them this wiretap. Well, it turns out they don't, and they never had, and he misled them, and the question was whether he knew it or not. Well, it later turns out, basically, it looks like the Solicitor General he really believed what he said to be true at the time, but quickly found out it wasn't. But basically, the Supreme Court in their decision, Alito writing the majority, heavily hinges upon this lied upon fact, basically saying, well, because it will be disclosed to people and has been disclosed to people, those aggrieved by it could bring this, so we're going to deny standing to the ACLU and the press and everybody they represent. And so an important Supreme Court decision was made based on bad information, and it actually hinged on that bad information, which we now know to have been a lie at the time. And Glenn Beck was talking about this either today or yesterday about how, we've gotten to the point where those things are kind of news but not really news because, and this goes back to what you're saying, when you just figure all these apologies are not sincere. Well, we now just assume whenever we heard that a government official lied about something, that's just par for the course. Like, of course he's going to lie. Of course they lie to us. Of course they lie. Of course they're going to lie to the court. So we've lost, it's now become so expected. It's almost as if your child, if you had a kid who just always acted out terribly, at a certain point, you're just not, okay, my kid's acting out again. That's what he always does. But it doesn't bode well for accountability, and it certainly doesn't help protect the rights of citizens, and it doesn't engender trust or faith in government. Right. And it creates a huge credibility gap. But we're now to the point where nobody cares. Like, if we go, people listening now are probably like, Carl, we all know they lie. Just get over it. Be prepared for it. And you're like, but my world's being changed. My rights are being altered.
Right.
My future for my child is changing, and the government's actively lying. And the question is, how long have they been doing this, and why are they doing this, and why do we let them lie? I think it's time. I think it's time for the citizens to go out, and get the pitchforks and let the politicians know that this is not acceptable behavior, and accountability. Congress needs to step up and do what they're supposed to do, which is police the presidency. Congress needs to police itself as well, though. They're a bunch of charlatans, best I can tell.
Yeah, I think sometimes people just get in this, and I mean, I'm guilty of it. You just get into this, what can I do? I'll vote. I think voting's important. I don't, it's definitely not all you can do, and because even voting could win, even if it's the best candidate, it's not even the lesser of two evils. Like, you're the best candidate, you want this person in there. That person, you almost just feel like it doesn't matter. You can be the person, or she, gotta be, correct there, that they're going to do something that you don't like. They're going to do something dishonest. You just feel like everybody in government is like that, and what do? I think people get overwhelmed and then just get to the point of, it's not, not my problem, but it is, and, you don't see it. It's not something that's sitting in front of you like, I didn't pay my bill and they're going to take my TV away. Well, that's something that happens to you,
right,
automatically. But this doesn't happen, automatically, and it's not something that, you see the second it happens. You know what I mean? Like, and there's so many paper trails to figure out what really happened, and I think people just get discouraged. And
there's just too much information. I mean, there's just too many things going on, and that's why somebody's got a bird dog. We need the Larry Claymans, and we need the Judicial Watch, and we need the left-wing groups, and we need the right. We need everybody poking government with sticks as often as they can. But we also have to know that at the end of the day, when you poke them in the eye, that they're going to tell you the truth, not be allowed to make up a lie to step around what you finally caught them on. Because if the people are going to be able to investigate and actively police their own democracy, then we have to have honesty from the political branches. I think Edward Snowden, a lot of people think he's a traitor for what he did, but I think he brought to the forefront just how bad the secrecy was getting. There's historical precedent and constitutional precedent for secrecy, but secrecy has to be something that a government uses judiciously and only when necessary and only in realms where it's appropriate. In dealing with our own citizenry, in policing our own people, in the day-to-day functions of government, this idea of secrecy has become paramount. And government's now allowed to do so many things without accountability, and that's just a terrible issue. Yeah.
And I don't mean to bring up the whole, Obama thing, but I still don't. I think one of the biggest things with Obamacare and leading into what we were just talking about is the whole, when, the read it or pass it to know what's in it thing. How that to me just is beyond comprehension. I don't understand how something like that.
No, and that's once again where we're at. We're at the position where our elected representatives, every one of them that voted no on it, probably didn't read it either. Okay. And every one of them that voted yes on it definitely didn't read it because there's no time. So all of them, shame on them, they should have refused to hold a vote until they'd had time to read it. And I understand that the one party can ram it through over the other's objection if they have enough people, but shame on them. To say that I am a representative of the people and my job is to represent their interest in something, and to say that their interest is served by me blindly signing off on something that I don't even know what it does, that was, written by a few people and not vetted by anybody. When good legislation is done, there's a lot of lawyers, here in the Harrisburg area where we live, but in every state capital, and there are legislators, and then there are many lawyers who work for those legislators who spend a lot of hours very carefully vetting bills and controlling language. Now, politics creeps back in. But nonetheless, generally, when Congress or legislature does their job right, many, many lawyers, many people that are experts in the area review that legislation long before they ever vote on it. And that was not done here. This was written in secret. It was passed in secret, essentially. And now it's being parceled out in secret because we never know which portions of it are going to be in effect when or not.
Right.
So the whole thing is a boondoggle. It's unconstitutional. It is another effacement to what is America and what is a democracy. So I'm going to let you go and hope another caller calls in.
Yeah, please do. And I can tell you that you sound, you're crystal clear.
Oh, good. That's what I like. That's what I like to hear because I never know with the setup here exactly how I'm sounding. I changed laptops for the Skype, and that seems to have solved the problem because this other laptop I had was on XP, and it was just so slow.
Okay.
So I put my other decent. I don't know how I ended up with so many computers, but I guess that's a hazard of this day and age. But equipment seems. All hoarding aside. But, they're obsolete 15 minutes after you buy them, so.
Yeah.
All right, well, thank you very much. Feel free to, we're going to be on, just to remind you, we're going to be on Sunday, 6 to 9, and then next Wednesday, 7 to 9. So every few days when you come up with something you want to talk about, feel free to call in because we want to have good regular call. Go ahead.
What's the number I have to call again?
It's 717-916-5189.
Okay.
And 5189 is that Chinese luck number,
That's right. Hey, thanks, Carl.
Thank you. Bye.
All right, bye.
All right. So 717-916-5189 if you want to get on the air here. We just had a really good caller there. Talked about a lot of free-ranging topics. It was very interesting, I thought. And that's what I want the show to be about. I want to know what you guys care about and what you're thinking about. I want to know what your thoughts are on the issues. And this is your chance. This isn't the big pipe with 100,000 listeners. It's not like getting on the Rush Limbaugh show yet. But it is something where, if you want to have a chance to get your side of the story out or you want to get your beliefs out, this will probably be listened to. Sunday night show, we had probably over 300 listeners total so far. And I'm expecting, probably something similar for tonight. And over time, as we build this up, I would anticipate a few thousand listeners every time we do it. And that's much different than broadcast. This is like going to satellite radio. This is something where you have to want to listen. So the people we're going to get are going to be, this is the smart crowd in here, kids. Caller, you're on the air.
Yeah, hi, Carl.
Yes.
This is Susan.
Yes, Susan. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Good. What do you want to talk about?
Well, I just wanted to say it is so great to have you back. You are excellent at explaining things. I don't really have any issues. I only want to bring up about the politics, about the presidential election and some of the things that were talked about with Hillary Clinton. And I'm thinking to myself, aren't we a little bit early to be bringing all these things up about the presidential election? With the election in 2014, I would think, I'm not a Republican. But I would think they would want to be talking more about the 2014 elections. I don't understand why we're going into the 2016.
Let me give you the inside baseball on that one, right? So right now Obama's weak, and right now Obama's not strong, and right now Obama's the devil, and they even made him look like the devil in that miniseries, The Bible, you know. Well, but my point is okay, so we want to keep tying everything to presidential politics. And so, okay, we're the smart crowd, so you and I are going to talk about this. We know, you know, and I know, at the end of the day, that the congressional elections are just as important as the presidential election, and your local elections are probably more important to you than a lot of your national elections, okay? But nobody knows who their downtown supervisor is or who their county commissioner is, because heaven forbid the guy who can make or break the value of your land, you care about him. But here's my point. So because people are so fascinated by who the next Supreme Court justice or president is, you're sort of beating up the Democrats by beating up Hillary, and you're tying her with Obama, and keep people's eye off the ball about the actual merits of each individual election. And at the same time, you can be seen as not necessarily just beating up on Obama. So I think that's the idea. That the plan is to talk about the presidential election and the Democrats as bad in general, and Hillary sully the president at the same time, but try to keep the focus off the individual races and the individual merits of the individuals. I think that's the plan, generally, with these types of elections, particularly where Obama's so weak. In other words, if Obama were so strong and there wasn't likely to be and there probably will be a huge downer for the Democratic Party in this next election, just because that's the normal cycle. You know, the president gets beat up. I took election law in law school, but I took a class on Congress in college, and one of the things that the professor pointed out to us is when you get elected in American politics to a statewide or national office, you usually don't win by much more than a few percentage points. You don't see 99% wins. You see sometimes an astronomical wins like 70% of the vote, okay? Mm-hmm. So here we say, when you take office, you have convinced 52, 53, maybe 60% of the voters that you're their guy. And 40% didn't want you to begin with. And now you actually have to start governing, and over the next year or two, half the people are going to realize you're not going to do what you promised them. Well, that's why they voted for you. So by the time you're down through the election cycle, you've got half the people who voted for you, excuse my French, but pissed off at you and not wanting to vote for you again. So you have to go back to the well and figure out how to reconvince them that, yeah, I lied to you the last time, but this time I really will stop global warming, or this time I really will close down Guantanamo Bay, or this time I really will push a gay marriage amendment through, or this time I really will push an anti-gay marriage amendment through, or this time I really, really will crack down on illegal immigrants and build a wall. So, and of course we believe it, which goes back to what I was talking about with the other caller, this pantomime where we actually let these people lie to us. And then when they don't do what they said they would do, we let them explain that that's okay, but they're going to do it next time. It's kind of like having a husband that cheats on you, and every time he has an affair, he says, "Listen, babe, I know, I just got carried away, but trust me, it won't happen again." And the next time you go, "Oh, well, okay, I guess he said it won't happen again." We should look back and go, okay, every politician in the history of the world said it won't happen again, but yet we reelect them again and again. And for some reason, we all have people we identify with, some people are huge John McCain fans. Some people are huge Hillary Clinton fans. And people identify and really respect that politician and really like him. But at the end analysis, I don't think there's... Mark Twain. There's a Mark Twain quote, something along the lines of, "If you have one liar, you have a fraud. If you have two liars, you have a law firm. And if you have three liars or three or more liars, you have a legislature." And I don't think I have the quote exactly right, but the idea basically is you can't
I wouldn't know the difference.
You can't trust politicians.
What do you think about the land management stuff that's going on? Do they have the right to keep the ATVs off of the land? Do you think that Calvin Bundy should pay his taxes?
Okay, well, yeah, I'll tell you what. But Bundy's making a claim that land is state land and not federal land. And it's an interesting claim that could have merit, but the courts have ruled against him. And there is a concept, and this is the problem with remembering the difference between anarchy and not having anarchy and having a stable, strong government that can protect people and allow business to run and the freedom of contract. You know, in other areas of the world where there is no law, there is no security, there is no economy, there is no wealth, and there is no prosperity. So we know that you have to have at least some amount of law. And a basic principle of law has to be due process. But another basic principle has to be that once you got due process, even if the result is wrong, you have to accept the result. Because as long as we allow people to simply say the result is wrong, therefore I don't have to follow the court's order, or I shouldn't be required to carry through with whatever, then you have anarchy. Now, does that mean I say civil disobedience is always wrong? No. I commend every person who's made meaningful change through civil disobedience. And in fact, I think a lot of race issues were brought to a head and resolved because people finally got the strength of will and the support they needed to engage in civil disobedience. But civil disobedience is sort of like free speech. It's something you can do, but you have to be prepared to have some consequences. You know, if you want to do a sit-in and chain yourself to a giant tree to keep the lumber company from cutting it down, you can do that, but you might go to jail. You might get arrested. You might get a record. If that's what, but to me, if you're truly interested in social change, you'll accept that risk. And same thing with free speech. You can say what you want, but it doesn't mean it's going to be without consequence. If I go out and I say something terribly racist and I happen to be an NBA owner and it leaks into the public somehow, what I said might be used against me. I had the right to say it, and you can't stop me from saying it, but I could still have repercussions from saying it. So I think Bundy should probably at some point have to recognize that once he's taken it through all the legal processes he can, that he may not get the answer he wants, and then he has to pick which consequence he wants to face. And so I think when people went out to defend him, I understand the desire to do so, and particularly initially I was very, very much pro that, but as I learned more about the situation, I've sort of come to the impression that his situation, as we'll call it, is one where he might be in the right, but it's not in a way that is going to be recognized, or in a way, you know, the lands of Nevada are not going to not become federal land and go back to the state. It's just not going to happen. And he lost his court battles. He needs to stand down and pay his fees. And if he can't make a business doing it, then we need a political solution, which is for people to march on Washington and convince the Congress to change it around. But here's what I already know. I already know that the federal government and the state government, they never get what they should out of any asset they own. In other words, if I owned a piece of land and I charged you grazing fees, I would charge you X dollars to make a living at it. We usually find out that the government charges a tenth of what they should to be profitable and what people will pay. So I have a hard time believing that what they're asking for is so onerous. Now, on the other hand, there was another rancher out there who won a fight with Bureau of Land Management because the judge found they weren't granting him due process because they kept changing their regulations that they wanted him to comply with. And so they wanted to kick him off the land, but every time he would come into compliance with what they said, they would change the goalpost. And the judge said, no, you can't do that. But that guy had to pay a fee still. Just that the judge said you can't keep changing things. There has to be some level of finality when the guy gets to the goalpost that you can't suddenly, say he didn't. But that also makes you wonder what they really want. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. I don't think that Harry Reid's solar farm was going to be built anywhere near this thing, and I don't really think that was some grand conspiracy there. But I do think you can't trust Harry Reid. We all, but again, that goes back to my thesis that you can't trust any politician, particularly if he's from Texas or Nevada or Illinois or Pennsylvania or 36 other states and a couple provinces. I mean, even the Canadians have their problems. If you follow a little their news once in a while. My point on all this is you have to have some respect for the rule of law. Now, on the other hand, having spent many years in courtrooms and doing things in them, I have met lawyers who have said, and I have felt this way myself, that justice is not always done in our courts, and that sometimes nobody cares. Our Superior Court and our Supreme Court, for instance, here in Pennsylvania, take the position that if an appellant does not put into their concise statement of matters complained of on appeal the precise grounds, then they waive their appeal. This means that any custody litigant, any person who's a mom or a dad who didn't have money for a lawyer or wasn't smart enough to get one, but who might be the better parent or the more loving parent and obviously is fighting for their children, gets knocked out of court all the time because they didn't comply with this technical rule. And the harsh application of it, for instance, to me, that's just them not wanting to do more work. They've harshly applied that rule, and they say, to fairness for the other litigant. But at the end of the day, basically, if a trial judge rules in favor of some degenerate parent and the other parent didn't have a lawyer and the other parent files their own appeal and they don't follow the rules and they screw up the fact that they have to file this special notice at the same time they file their notice of appeal, they get bumped out of court. And to me, that's courts putting form over substance. And that's where we were 500, 700 years ago, when in law everything was so technical, and if you didn't do it perfectly, we just knocked you out of court. And then there was a movement for hundreds of years to start to loosen the rules a little bit to say, hey, you know what, we're kind of in the fairness business, so if we can reach a fair decision without prejudicing the other party unnecessarily or irreparably, then we're still going to listen to this guy's claims, even if he didn't quite do it, dot all the I's and cross all the T's. But the new movement now is to go back to this harsher format, and I don't have a problem with it if AT&T is suing Microsoft or right now, what was it, Samsung and Google are going at it, and their lawyers miss a deadline or screw something up. I think, hey, throw them out of court. Who cares? They're sophisticated business entities. But why should some parent lose their kid to children and youth simply because they didn't understand a rule? Mm-hmm. Not because the kid shouldn't be with them. In other words, to me, certain questions fundamentally have to be heard, even if they shouldn't have been heard because of some technical problem or some finality issue. But what do I know, You know a lot. Well, I'm going to let some other callers call in. I'll think of things to call you on about Sunday. All right, we'll be here. I'll watch Meet the Press, and then I'll call you. All right, perfect. Love All right, thanks, Carl. Thank you. All right, bye. 717-916-5198. 5189, I'm sorry, 5189. 717-916-5189 if you want to call in and get on the air here. Again, 717-916-5189. Had a couple good calls so far. That's what I like. The other thing is, you notice in this format, we can do extended phone calls. I kind of posted this a little bit on the About page, and I'll say this. Of course, we've got an open line now, 717-916-5189. Regular radio, when I was on the air with WHP 580 and I would do an hour, it actually translates into about 44 minutes of radio. Certain other times could be as little as 40 minutes of radio. So basically 2/3 of an hour. So a 2-hour program here is really the equivalent of a 3-hour program on a clear channel station or a Cumulus station where there's heavy ad driving and there's heavy fluff, self-promotion, traffic and weather, which some people need. Of course, these hours that we're doing the shows, you shouldn't need traffic and weather. In fact, my joke was I told somebody I was going to call the show No Traffic, No Weather, because, you feel like sometimes the discourse gets chopped up. But the point is, again, the talk line number is 717-916-5189, so call in now. the discourse that it allows means that we don't have to limit you to 3 minutes. In other words, if you're a good caller and you have something interesting to say and you just want to chew the cud for a while, we can go back and forth and we can be a little more free-ranging. And of course, you can go back later and listen to the podcast to hear how you sound. I know some callers probably later listen to themselves and go, oh, I can't believe I said that. But the reality is you get more comfortable in these formats, then it gets easier to talk. And you'll find that if you call more frequently, you'll eventually become a pro caller, and you'll be able to pick up on my hints sometimes when I'm trying to move you along or get you to move in a different direction or trying to draw something out of you. Sometimes I feel like I'm asking somebody something and they're pausing because I don't think they realize I want them to talk. But it is talk radio, and if we just sit there and stare at each other, it's not going to be very interesting. 717-916-5189. Again, 717-916-5189. If you're just joining us, we talked a little bit about Russia earlier. Talked about Paul Krugman and global warming. I'm always warm to talk about that one. I'm still convinced. I am still absolutely convinced. And if you go into my Spreaker archive from the past Rominger shows here, you can hear my challenge on global warming. And I'll tell you to listen to that one. The other thing is this whole global warming thing just drives me to point of distraction. We'll tie this back. If the government lies to you, if they lie to the Supreme Court to get decisions, if they lie about Benghazi, to change the election, not to let you know that Al-Qaeda was still around. It was some internet video. Yes, that's what it was. Intentionally mislead you. But now when it comes to climate change, we're supposed to believe that the government has our best interest at heart. And I think I brought this up the other day, but I'll bring it up again. Look at what happened with all these dietary guidelines. And now we're learning that had you followed these dietary guidelines that have been given to us over the last 40 years, you've probably made your health worse. Yep, you probably made your health worse. That's probably why exercise is such a positive in so many ways, because that's the one thing you can't screw up. You know, you work out. The more working out you do, the more exercise you do, the better off you are. But I had an invitation to, I think it's to the Molly Pitcher Brewery tonight, which isn't too far from where I'm broadcasting from. I want to go check out their facility they're working on, and that should be pretty interesting when it's done. But I mentioned that only because I was talking about working out and diet, and I thought, alcohol, one of these things you hear about is alcohol's evil, alcohol's bad, and I agree it creates a lot of carnage. But recently when they started studying all the people that are in their 90s, I know a lot of people who lived into their 90s regularly consumed alcohol, and in fact, not the mass consumption, but the regular consumption of alcohol is tied to longer life. Cigarette smoking is not. Imagine that. Cigar smoking, I'm not sure. We'll find out. We'll see how long I go for. But I did notice this the other day, and I pointed this out to somebody. I said, do you ever hang out with a bunch of cigar smokers, or you pick out with a bunch of cigarette smokers? You don't hear the deep lung cough coming out of the cigar smokers that I hear in a lot of cigarette smokers. You know the cough I'm talking about. And you can hear the whole lung getting into it. So I still firmly believe that cigars are better for you. Actually, I was over at Harrisburg Beer and Cigar the other day. They had a very nice event. I'm still going to go over and frequent that place. And, of course, they have Carlisle Beer and Cigar as well, which I enjoy going to as well. But anyhow, long story. What I was trying to point out in the short story, long story, the old joke, my catchphrases there are verbal crutches or something they call them in the radio industry. Those dietary restrictions hurt more people than they helped. Now I'm supposed to start fueling my car with solar energy and wind energy and magic beans because, magic beans will cause flatulence and that will contribute to the methane, so no magic beans. Anyhow, you're supposed to get that car going and use less carbon. You're supposed to do all kinds of things to lower your carbon footprint, because if we don't, the world's going to heat up and we're all going to die due to terrible climate disruption. Well, I don't believe it. I don't think that's what's going to happen. I don't think that they can accurately make those predictions or those assumptions And I'm troubled by the fact that the world was once covered in ice and now is not, and probably will be again. And I want to know what we're going to do when the next ice age comes, if we're allowed to be opposed to that, or we have to just take it because that's what's supposed to happen, and that's what nature wanted. Oh, boy, I don't know what else to tell you guys about the global warming one. I could just, like I say, go on and on and on about that one. And, of course, I did bring up with the one caller a minute ago, Tim Geithner. That's an interesting one. Basically saying that the president's people told me when I went on this talk show to lie, to make sure we got the word out that we weren't going to hurt Social Security. So I was supposed to say that Social Security does not contribute to the deficit. Social Security is part of our deficit. I did the breakdowns on Facebook one time when Ken Matthews was talking about the federal budget. And I like his show, but I'll tell you something. He falls into the same trap a lot of other people do. Oh, the federal budget. These people on welfare. Welfare. Welfare is such a small segment of the budget compared to Medicare and Social Security, which are both forms of welfare. The middle class gets the earned income tax credit for owning a home. That's welfare. The spending on welfare, if it was eliminated completely overnight, just all of it, would not balance the federal budget. That's where we're at. So it's not welfare. It's not the issue. It's just general giant spending, and it's things like, if you're a sugar producer, you get a tariff to protect you against foreign competition. If you are a farmer, you get money not to farm certain land, or you get price guarantees on certain crops. If you make milk, you get price guarantees on milk. That's a form of welfare. Where's the money come from? It's wealth redistribution. My gallon of milk could cost half as much. Why doesn't it? Because I need to make sure we take enough money out of the masses and redistribute it to keep the dairy farmers in business, who, by the way, are now mainly large conglomerates. Archer's Daniel Midland and Cargill convinced the Congress to make ethanol a priority. They are now processing even more corn than they used to because they now make both fuels for use in your car and still use the corn for the other things that they used it for before. So as a result, corn prices are up. They're richer. That is a form of welfare because it is, again, a tax redistribution scheme, basically saying you must buy their alcohol if you want to run your car because we had to take out some other oxygenating agent. I don't know. I pretty much think that's an interesting problem, and it's time for us to kind of get our minds grasped around that everybody's going to have to give something up from the government if we're going to shrink the size of it. I don't know. What do you guys think? 717-916-5189. 717-916-5189. Jump on the air here, and we will talk about it. I really want to know kind of also what you guys think we should be doing in the world right now with Russia. I'm very curious about that because I feel like are we in a interventionist mood, or are we back to the standpoint where we don't want to be involved in all the world stuff? Where do we really want to be? I don't know. Well, I'll say Lucinda just posted something here. I think cigars are smoked less than cigarettes. Therefore, they damage less quickly. Okay. Cigar smoking is safer than cigarettes. Okay. That's from the Mayo Clinic. We're going to study that. We're going to study that one because I want to know. Now, does that mean I'm going to give up cigars? No. But, and I will say this. I had a friend who told me that I was addicted to cigars. How dare he? And that, I would never stop smoking them. And I did. I said to him, I go, okay, what if I don't smoke one tomorrow and then I just don't smoke one for a while? Will you believe me? And he's like, well, I don't know. You're addicted. Yeah. So 18 months later, I'm like, hey, Mike, can I smoke cigars now or am I still prohibited? He's like, yeah, you probably aren't addicted. You can smoke them. So I did 18 months without just because to prove I didn't need them. But I do enjoy them, and I do enjoy a good cigar. I don't care for cigarettes. So that's another thing on this show. If you guys do want to talk about occasionally cigars or golf, I'm happy to get those two topics out of the quiver as well. 717-916-5189. Again, 717-916-5189. If you want to get in the air, happy to take your call. What else was in the news today? Well, I did see some interesting things going on in the gun realm lately. There's a gun now that's going to have a smart bracelet, and the gun won't fire unless you have the smart bracelet on, because the gun will be locked unless the signal from the smart bracelet gets to the gun. And this type of technology apparently is available now. But New Jersey has a law that says once that type of technology is available, they're going to outlaw other guns that don't have that type of technology. So some gun store owner was going to sell the gun down in Maryland somewhere. And when he went to do that, he triggered a protest and almost got himself in all kinds of trouble for trying to sell this thing. And as a result, people said, no, do not sell this because you're going to screw it up. So here's the headline. I just pulled it up here. Pressure foils the start of New Jersey's tough smart gun law. Gun dealers in California and Maryland are prepared to sell firearms that set off New Jersey's tough law. Their ultimate target in New Jersey, where the gun rights lobby has been frantically working to derail a 12-year-old law intended to speed the adoption of new technology that would ensure guns only fire in the hands of authorized users. Long in abstraction, the law that was largely forgotten until a story in the record 7 months ago became a flashpoint in the debate over gun safety as German manufacturer Armatix has attempted to sell the first such product in the country. Two guys, a guy down in Maryland was Andy Raymond, appeared to be ready to sell such a device, but met resistance from gun rights activists. They've decided not to do it. But somebody's going to be the first to go, and then this law will take effect. A gun's only as good as it can be used, or is only as good as it is effective. Maybe the better way to say that. So if I have to keep my gun locked up in a vault, in the closet, in a room not attached to the bedroom, or in a detached garage, or whatever government regulation they would dream up, and the ammunition locked and wrapped separately in a car or other area of the house, I'm never going to be able to use it for self-defense. Conversely, if I have a loaded pistol under my pillow, and I don't have any children in the house, I guess that's my prerogative, and I can get the gun quickly and easily and use it effectively. But somewhere in between is this smart gun technology. Now, all things are fallible, so for instance, I guess the firing pin could fail in my Glock 40 S&W. I could short shuck my Mossberg 500A, or I could forget to load my rifle, and for all those reasons not adequately be able to defend myself. But why add a level of complication? Like, what if one night when I'm sleeping, the little band I'm supposed to be wearing decides to quit, the battery goes dead, and when I go to pick the gun up, I can't arm it or use it because my smart gun is not electronically enabled at the moment. Well, that's why, for instance, I'll give you a for instance, just think this through. Law enforcement quite often uses pump shotguns as opposed to semi-automatic shotguns. Now with Benelli and the inertia actions, it's not as bad as it used to be, but the gas-driven semi-autos, as anybody who's ever shot one will tell you, have a tendency, if not kept perfectly clean, to jam. A pump shotgun, on the other hand, doesn't jam. It's more reliable. So you pick the one that's not going to, on the one time you need it to work, jam on you. As a result, the pump shotgun's favored. Of course, you can sometimes short shuck them and then leave yourself, or as I once missed a deer that way by short shucking. I could tell you that whole story, too. Beautiful buck, takes off running. I chase him, miss him, and then I cut across a field and I run like the wind as far as I can, and boy, I ran right into him. And he stood right there looking right at me, and I put my Mossberg 500A cantilever barrel with a scope on him. And I tried to pull the trigger, and nothing happened. And later, as he bounded away, I figured out that I had short-shucked it and not completely locked down the chamber. Therefore, my gun would not fire. Why am I saying all these things? What I'm trying to say is there's enough things that can go wrong with the gun as it is when you need it. Having experienced this in a hunting situation, I don't really need another problem with a gun when I'm trying to defend myself. So I would strongly urge that we stay away from these kinds of technologies and or we at least don't make them mandatory. Now, there are people out there who may want that kind of technology, and that's their choice. That's the idea. You should have freedom of choice. If you want to have a gun that's less effective, or a gun that you feel is safer to have around your household, and that may well be safer for certain circumstances, the neighbor kid is not going to shoot your kid with it, more power to you. Get it. Have it. But you shouldn't, by doing so, affect the rights of everyone else, and that's the problem with this New Jersey law. It basically says that once somebody in the United States buys one of these things and starts buying them or selling them, then everybody in New Jersey has to have it that way. And they'll eventually, confiscate your regular guns, which they're doing now, as you know. In New York and Connecticut, they've started with the registrations. They said in the New York law you would lose your magazines. Now they're saying, well, you just can't load your magazine to more than 7. I guess they may have decided confiscation might have caused more problems than it solved, considering the fact that half the gun owners in the state are about to take their anger out on Governor Cuomo and maybe diselect him at some point. Is that possible? I don't know. But obviously, it's not very popular up there. It's called the SAFE Act, and if you've been following that at all, it hasn't gone over well. But you know what? The problem is it has passed, and then our Supreme Court recently refused to take on some gun control cases, which have essentially suggested that harsh gun control is still going to be a possible measure here in the United States, even though we've got a Second Amendment right to defend ourselves in the home. We don't seem to be getting that outside of the home. Again, 717-916-5189. If I'm touching on anything you guys want to talk about, feel free to jump on here, and we'll get your calls. Again, the talk line number is 717-916-5189. Jump on. Just typing something here quick to the Twitter because we try to keep the feeds going as we're going. I'm a one-man band right now. Eventually I need to get a call screener, and I have a couple of volunteers. And I didn't want to make anybody volunteer to be a call screener just yet because volunteering to be a call screener means, well, it means that you're going to have to, be here the whole time, and not literally here, but, dedicated to a computer on a Sunday night or a Wednesday night, and then we'd have to set up a routine. And I don't think anybody realizes how much dedication that actually takes, particularly if you have a family or other obligations. You're actually going to burn in 6 or 7 hours a week just to help me out. I don't know if that's worth it or not. Somebody did post, by the way, they wanted some more updates on celebrity stuff. I did see that Paris Hilton today was at the airport, and she was excited because 9 out of her 10 bags had made it. Usually half of her suitcases are missing. And I was kind of chuckling to myself, thinking of like Joan Collins or the old Zsa Zsa Gabor in Green Acres, arriving at the hotel with so much luggage. 10 suitcases? That girl travels with 10 suitcases? That's actually went through my head. So apparently Paris Hilton got 9 for 10 of her suitcases today. That's about the much celebrity news I have, but I saw it on her Twitter feed because, of course, I follow her on Twitter, mainly because she's thin and blonde, but also because once in a while she tweets something worth reading, like that 9 out of 10 suitcases arrived at the baggage claim section. But if you guys want to hear some more celebrity gossip or those sorts of things, I'm happy to work a little bit of that in. In fact, maybe we can get hold of Missy Bad Girl, who did the celebrity news read for me when I was auditioning for Bob Durgan's spot, and see if she wants to come on once a week and give us a celebrity update as to what's going on. Those things are fun, actually, and I understand sometimes people say, oh, this is a serious conversation. But there is something about cultural awareness and knowing what's going on. I think they were talking about, on the radio the other day, was it Jay-Z getting beat up by one of those New Jersey girls or something like that in an elevator. And, of course, the more interesting thing is the feed leaked. Somebody got the feed and shared it because, of course, TMZ probably paid some god-awful amount of money for them to leak it, if I had to guess. By the way, if you ever do see some celebrities do something weird and you capture it, my advice is to get hold of TMZ immediately and ask for cash because they will pay. I don't know if they actually pay or not, but they seem to always have the good stuff, so I got to imagine they do. They even had, the tapes for Sterling out there I want to say silver, but it's sterling, right? But the head of the NBA is silver, and the owner is sterling, so it's sterling silver. That one always kind of gets me. Again, 717-916-5189, 717-916-5189. Another topic that we should probably cover down the road here, because I'm not as well versed on it as I would like to be, is the Common Core education standards. And I heard something interesting. I think it was Glenn Beck talking about it. I don't think it was Hannity, but I'm pretty sure it may have been Glenn Beck talking about the fact that the people who were involved in it, part of its creation, were not overly impressed with it, and that, in fact, it's not nearly the strong standard that it should be, and that politics have crept into it. And I'd be curious to hear what you guys have to say about that, because I think some of you guys out there need to educate me on Common Core. 717-916-5189. Again, 717-916-5189. One of those things that makes me think about homeschooling sometimes, you know. Where are these schools really at? What is the curriculum really like? And then there's so many of them, trying to figure out who's doing what. You know, where should I send my son to school? What should which elementary school in the district would he go to? What district should he be in? You know, all these questions. And I don't think there's any good answers for parents. So I'd be curious to see what you guys think about public school education, Common Core, homeschooling. 717-916-5189. Okay, I'm getting some correction here. Let's see. Jay-Z and Beyonce's sister, Solange attacked Jay-Z in the elevator, and we don't know why yet. Okay, Solange. For some reason, this is how little I know. I, for some reason, thought it was like Kim Kardashian or something, but I guess she's going out with a different guy. I get so confused. Yeah, I'm getting volunteers for the homeschooling, it looks like. Yeah, no, I'd be curious because I want to know about Common Core, and I want to know where that all really stands. And, you know, I actually did a custody case years ago that involved homeschooling. And it's interesting because Pennsylvania law, and I think a lot of states are the same way, Pennsylvania law makes it clear that homeschooling education is just as good as, and it stands on equal footing as a public or private school education. The same with private and public schools are on the same footing initially. In other words, judges can make individual determinations. You know, you can determine that District A is better. District A is better than District B. You can also make a determination that homeschooler A is better than school B or private school B for a lot of reasons. So that recognition of the law is very critical and important, because otherwise in custody cases they would start behind the eight ball. But I always felt like homeschoolers in custody court don't get the fair shake because there's not too many judges I've ever met who were homeschooled. And I don't know if that's just a symptom of the time. In other words, since most judges are about as old as dirt, and I don't mean that in a bad way, but, you know, by the time a person becomes a judge, et cetera, the average age of a judge is up there. You know, around 50, 55, somewhere in that range. I would guess homeschooling was not as big a deal back in the day, but I don't know. That's just assumption. That's a wild-eyed assumption. So that's just, again, the kind of stuff I'd like to talk about, because Common Core does fascinate me. I mean, I really want to know where these people are coming from, where the standards come from, and how they were implemented and who decided them. Because learning who's behind things sometimes helps you understand. You know, the guy from Hobby Lobby is pushing some kind of Bible study course for schools. And there's some concern about it, and I understand that. The answer is he's gone out into some forums and said, I want to get these Bible study classes into school because I want to turn these kids into Christians. Then he's gone into the public forum with the schools and said, this is non-sectarian. It's just education about the Bible. It's an elective, and it will pass muster. And you can teach classes about the Bible, for instance, in schools. But your motive is important, because when we look at people's motives, we're allowed to look at them in determining what they're really trying to accomplish and what the real purpose of something is, and you can weigh that at it. And so I think it's important on the other side of the fence, you know, if we can weigh what the Hobby Lobby guy's motivation is in Christian teachings in schools, we can conversely weigh what the secular or politically correct motivations were for creating Common Core standards. Are we teaching Marxism and collectivism and whatnot, or what is it really, and how does it play out? So I don't think those are unfair comparisons, if that makes sense. But I would, again, just be curious to know a little bit more, like I say, about the origins of Common Core, and I'm not an expert on that. So those of you out there, 717-916-5189, you can call in tonight, get us started on it if you want. Otherwise, what we'll do is we'll talk about it down the road. And I may need to do a little research and do one of my blog posts. If you go to Carl Rominger, KarlRominger.com, you'll see, like, if you go to the front of the site, you'll see our latest post. So each show is going to have a post, but up there right now I have why Russian aggression will continue, voter ID laws. We'll do something on Common Core maybe and do a little research. That way I'll have something to talk about and I'll know kind of what I'm talking about. By the way, voter ID laws, my article was Voter ID laws, an epic fail or reasonable requirement. Now, Rand Paul supposedly told the New York Times, everybody's going completely crazy on this voter ID thing. I think it's wrong for Republicans to go too crazy on this issue because it's offending people. I'm kind of with him, even if he didn't actually say that. Voter ID laws are much ado about nothing. There really is no wide-scale individual voter fraud, and in fact, best I can tell, very little voter fraud. And courts have not been kind to the new laws. Arkansas found the law unconstitutional. It's going to stay in place pending an appeal, so it will be in place through the May 20th primaries there. Pennsylvania, our Judge McGinley ordered in January that PA voter identification law was unconstitutional because, quote, there is no legal, non-burdensome provision of a compliant photo ID to all qualified electors. And Corbett's announced he wouldn't appeal it. Part of the problem was, and I said this before on the radio, they actually told the court that they were unaware of any individual voter fraud. How do you weigh the burden of a constitutional claim like that when you claim that there's actually no problem in another breath? I mean, it was absolutely mentally insane for the Republican Attorney General to have agreed to that at the time. I have no idea what she was thinking. But obviously it was fatal. Okay, again, 717-916-5189 if you want to call in, 916-5189. Again, 717-916-5189. What else do we have here? Oh, I had another state or two in there. The Wisconsin, federal judge struck down Wisconsin's photo identification law, finding no evidence that voter ID laws are needed to protect against voter fraud. Sounds like Pennsylvania. In that case, though, the judge found the voter ID law not under state law like Pennsylvania, but he found it violated Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, which is a federal law. He said that there's 300,000 citizens without an ID, and at least some of them would be disenfranchised. But it didn't really matter because there's no legitimate it would prevent more legitimate votes being cast than fraudulent ones. But on the other side of the coin, for those of you who are in favor of these things, Kansas and Arizona, district judges ruled that people must provide proof of U.S. citizenship in those two states when registering to vote, and that they can continue to require that. And even though it wasn't initially on the federal form, until it's decided by the 10th Circuit, you will have to continue to provide proof of citizenship in Arizona and Kansas. So voter ID laws have had kind of a mixed bag of reactions, which also reminds me, talking about the state levels, I guess the gay marriage issue is sweeping across the states right now. After state is invalidating bans on gay marriage. I don't know what that portends for Pennsylvania. We have lawsuits in the works. I wouldn't be surprised to see results soon. And it's getting to be that time of the year, by the way, when we should start seeing some results coming out of the United States Supreme Court. The various decisions on Obamacare and other cases that they've been hearing this term. I probably should do a little synopsis of what we've got yet to come, because there's going to be some exciting cases coming out. There's no doubt about that. Some very exciting cases coming out of the Supreme Court, and it'll be interesting to see what people's reactions to those are. I want to tell you a little bit more about the website. So on each of these posts, like the one I was just telling you about, you can actually go in there and comment on there and leave replies or comments to the articles I post. So that's always helpful because we need some feedback and tell me what else you want to know, and we can address it. Obviously, we've got the phone number for the show up there, 717-916-5189. So if you want to get in the air right now, feel free. And then we've got links down the side, which will show you like recent posts, the radio show. So it'll have a little, right up in the right-hand corner, it's a little recent feed of the radio show. Then an ad in there. Then a little button to click and actually listen to the radio show. The Twitter feed, a Facebook feed from the Carl Rominger Show on Facebook. Weekend appointment archives are down there. You know, all those years I did with WHP 580, I have all the archives up on Spreaker. So if you want to listen to any of the old legal shows. And one of the things we're going to do is we're going to go through those shows and do a account or a accounting of what the shows were about. So maybe not every question in every show, but maybe 4 or 5 questions from every show and indicate them in the description so that you'll be able to search for it on Spreaker. So when you go on Spreaker, you probably haven't figured this out yet, or maybe you have. You can search for shows and information. Those descriptions are searchable. So if we put what legal questions were asked and what answers were given, it'll make that archive a lot better to use because it will help you find shows that might answer the questions you might be having. As you know, I don't do the legal advice show anymore. This is a politics show, but those archived ones are still available, and people are still listening to them every day. So feel free to dip into there if you're interested. What else we have on the website? I also have a book section, and I'm going to start doing book reviews, and I may have mentioned this before. So if you have a book you want me to read, send me a notice on Facebook or send me an email or go to the site and use the contact form. If you think there's a book I should read or you really want me to review for the other listeners, I'd be happy to do that. Right now I've got just a little collection of conservative books up there with direct links to Amazon. And that's just until we can get the actual individual book reviews by moi up there. So you got to send me the books you want me to read so I can review them. And I will do that. Of course, I'm going to pick books myself too, but I think it would be interesting for you guys to pick some books for me to read. Try to keep them under 1,000,000 pages because I don't have all the time in the world. But I will read them, and I will review them, and I will discuss them on the air as well. So we could also do a book club. That's another idea that I had, which I don't literally mean a book club, but we could pick a book or two, and go ahead and agree a month in advance. Okay, let's pick a book. Let's all read the book. We'll pick something short, and then we can do a show where everybody will sound like a genius because we'll all have read the book and we can talk to each other authoritatively. And people who aren't in on the loop will be like, how the hell do these guys know so much about this book? Well, but I think that is actually a viable way to do things too, because studying certain material is also a very powerful way. Glenn Beck does a lot of this where he makes these books. He actually writes these books to help enable people to debate their neighbor, or to talk authoritatively and with confidence about a subject. One of the things about debate and oration in general is speaking with authority, whether you're right or wrong, is a way to motivate people and bring them to your side. So if whether you have crazy ideas or not crazy ideas, understanding how to present them and understanding what logical points to make about them, talking points as they will be, are very helpful. Using good analogies. I'm sometimes known for weird analogies, but using good analogies and a basic understanding of the material will cause the other person to go, wow, this person knows more about this than I do. Therefore, they must be authoritative. Therefore, I should probably listen to them. 5% of the time will engender the completely opposite reaction, what a know-it-all. But nonetheless, it's a viable and a good way about doing things. So if you guys can pick some books, you do. I'll let you guys pick the books, and then we'll maybe make a little book club out of 1 or 2 of them and see how many people want to read it and discuss it. And we could either do that on a regular scheduled show or we could even do a book club show, because that's the one nice thing about this format. Besides every Wednesday from 7 to 9 and every Sunday from 6 to 9, we will be able to create individual shows whenever we want. 717-916-5189. Again, 717-516... 516? No, not yet. 916-5189. I'm going to get that all butchered up. Bet the Farm is a book that I read that I do want to probably do a review on. I think people should read it. It's about the food industry, and it's not one of these howdy-towdy books about how we should all eat whole foods or how we should all, throw away fast foods or anything like that. The author in the book instead basically talks about the modern food market and how money really flows through agriculture these days. And he starts out with a very neat premise about, what if we could just feed the whole world? How hard would it be? How about just pizza? It's fairly nutritious. Can we make pizza for everybody? And when you start to read about what it takes for just Domino's to make pizza or just Papa John's to make pizza, and how many acres of tomatoes and how many gallons of milk and how many just voluminous loads of wheat it takes to feed just those three pizza makers, Papa John's, Pizza Hut, and Domino's go through each, just incredible amounts. And they don't come anywhere close to feeding the world. Basically, if we tried to feed the world with pizza, it wouldn't work. We don't have enough tomatoes. We can't grow enough tomatoes. We can't grow enough cheese and milk. It's very interesting. And then it goes on from there to explain how Wall Street has taken over financing in agriculture and squeezed farmers, and how the price of grain is no longer fixed by what happens on the farm, but instead fixed by what happens at Goldman Sachs and other large institutional traders who make up the decisions about what wheat should cost some year and who create false run-ups. And it's very fascinating. And it's not a hard read. It's not a very long read. And it's not overly technical. It's one of those ones that after you read it, you feel like, wow, I really know a lot more than when I went into that thing. I really feel like I can speak authoritatively a little bit about how screwed up our food supply has become and what's really going on. So the other thing I'd asked people earlier if they wanted to give us some topics for the show. So let's see here if I've got one I can take. It just takes me a minute to find it. Where are you guys at? All right. We got Biden. Poor Biden. I feel bad for that guy. He gets so much flack, and he's just a little crazy, not a lot. Global warming. Okay, yeah, we just talked about that one. We got that one covered. The death penalty and the new mixture of medicine that causes torture to those on death row. I read an article, actually. I did a little research on this, and I read an article by a fella who actually created this stuff, and he says he would use a barbiturate now, not the 3-drug system that was originally created and now has been modified. It seems like they really aren't sure. They really aren't sure what they need to be doing. But the irony is, you can put a pet down, you can put a old person down humanely, but for some reason, prisoners can't put prisoners down. Massachusetts woman faces wiretapping charge after recording own arrest. Yeah, this is one of those ones that disturbs me. And why does it disturb me? Police have charged a Massachusetts woman with unlawful wiretapping after accusing her of secretly recording her arrest of disorderly conduct charges. And this comes from Fox News. When she was about to be arrested, police say she activated her smartphone recording feature hidden in her purse and recorded her arrest. She was charged unlawful wiretapping, disorderly conduct in an open container. Let's see. According to a police report obtained by a newspaper, the arrest stemmed from a heated argument between her and two men. Let's see. While Massachusetts law prohibits the recording of audio without the consent of the person being recorded, a Boston attorney won a $170,000 settlement against the city in 2012 after he was arrested for using a cell phone to shoot a video of an arrest. This is interesting because she actually just left the recorder on during her arrest. So it would be perfectly fine for the police to record her. But heaven forbid she records them. What the hell are the police so afraid of? Why in America is it wrong for a citizen to tape their own arrest or to record their own arrest? What could the police possible interest be in this? Let me tell you something. There is no good reason for the police to be opposed to this, is there? Can anyone tell me a good reason? Call in right now, 717-916-5189. Because I'm telling you, there is no good reason for the police to be opposed to being taped or recorded doing what is their job. 717-916-5189. I mean, really, seriously, and all I can't think of a single reason, legitimate reason why the police should be the least bit concerned. But we see in Florida, we see in Massachusetts, we see in Maryland, we've seen here in PA, police officers arresting people for recording them. Police taking the position that people should not be recording them, and somehow that has interfered with their investigation. In the meantime, they've got their cars wired for audio and sound, which they turn on and off at their pleasure sometimes. Sometimes they can't turn it on and off at their pleasure. But magically, for instance, the Pennsylvania State Police have an unmarked car which does not have a digital video recorder in it like the marked cars. So, if you want to go out and have a little happier hunting, you take the unmarked car, therefore there'll be no videotape of what you were up to that night. If you're running routine traffic, instead of DUI patrols where you might be fishing a little bit, you take a marked car rather than the unmarked. Some police departments let police turn it on and off at will, and they turn it on when they want and they turn it off when they want. It's problematic because, first of all, they can turn their tape on and off, but they have the absolute right to record you whether you want to be recorded or not. Then at the same time, they want to complain or prevent citizens from recording them. Heaven forbid somebody have a videotape of the police doing their job, because if they're doing their job right and they're doing their job appropriately and they're doing their job honestly, they have nothing to hide. So what are they upset about? What are they upset about in Massachusetts? What's so terrible that they don't want on tape? Did they say something to her? Were they inappropriate with her? Did they make rude comments to her? Some police officers, most police officers, are complete gentlemen or ladies when they're performing their duties. But there is an internet collection of replete terrible videos of officer behavior, which borders on the absurd and the insane. And I suspect that the police don't want those videos getting out, and they don't want them being made by citizenry. And they don't want to know, they want to control the situation if the video is going to get out. So I just can't think of a good motivation. And I could go on and on about this, but nonetheless, the police should not care about, nor should the police be making a big deal about citizens videotaping or taping them. And in fact, they should welcome it. Yeah, I've just read another one of these Facebook. They're getting. If you follow my Facebook page, by the way, simultaneously with this, it's just Carl.Rominger. It's facebook.com/Carl.Rominger. We get a lot of good feed on here of people saying lots of funny things as I talk, and so I sometimes chuckle because I'm reading what they're saying about me. Again, 717-916-5189 is the talk line if you want to jump on the air here. I'd like to know what your guys' thoughts are on all the things we've talked about tonight or whatever else you want to talk about. So we have a few more minutes, so if you want to be the last guy to dive on the line here, go ahead, give it a try. 717-916-5189. Don't be shy now. I know some of you guys are shy about calling. It's funny because I've had people say, I've always wanted to call the radio. I didn't have the courage. And I'm like, I understand that, but trust me, it's very painless. I'll walk you through it. It won't hurt one bit when I get you on the air. It might hurt a little bit, but not physically, just emotionally and mentally. And in all those places. No, but I want to point out again the burden of government regulation. That's what I was thinking about with the CDL drivers earlier, and then I was thinking about it in regards to guns, and everything we've talked about tonight is touched on by more and more government regulation, more and more government laws. Somehow we existed as a society. And I remember I told the caller earlier, I said you have to have the rule of law, and you have to have respect for law. But, the more laws you have, and the more silly laws you have, and the more asinine laws you have, and the more backward laws you have, the harder it is to respect the laws you should respect, let alone the laws you need to respect, when you've got just so much you don't need to really have any serious respect for. I mean, the idea, for instance, that somebody would be charged for recording the police, the idea that somebody would be in trouble for defending themselves with a firearm, the idea that somebody would be in trouble or lose their livelihood because they have diabetes, and even though they manage it well with insulin, some government bureaucrat's going to second-guess their ability to drive a semi-trailer. It just isn't right, just isn't a good thing, and it's the wrong direction for us to be headed in. But for some reason over the years, we've let government just blossom. And I don't know if this... See, I wasn't here 100 years ago. A couple of you might have been. Some of us weren't here 50 years ago. And probably if you're in your mid-70s or your 80s, you might remember 50 or 60 years ago. But somehow this Leviathan, this giant entity of government, has just creeped everywhere in ways that it never did before. Now, I know it's been said, the king had absolute power, right? But the king didn't really care what you were doing. And in this day and age, because he was unaware of who you were, so even though the king had absolute power on a day-to-day basis, you probably never deal with the king. Now, the government knows what you're doing, where you're doing it, when you're doing it, and it cares, and it can reprimand everybody. It can exercise its absolute power over everybody. And that seems to be this mass or this morass of regulation, this overlay over overlay over overlay, leaves us less free and less free as time goes on. And I'm just trying to figure out when we woke up to that. I think we are waking up to it or are awake to it now. But the entrenchment of government is so large and it's so hard for somebody to do anything about it. It's going to take a concerted effort, and it's going to take a strong concerted effort because there are those who love regulation. And there are even businesses who love regulation. Businesses always claim to be for deregulation, but big businesses are always in favor of regulation. It kills competition. Do you know what it takes, for instance, to comply with the basic labor laws in Pennsylvania, and for a manufacturer, so you're going to make a product, you've got to worry about your workers' comp rules. You've got to worry about your unemployment compensation rules. You've got to worry about your OSHA safety rules. You've got to get something from industry, labor and industry. You've got to worry about their rules. You've got to worry about local zoning regulations. You've got to worry about land use regulations. You've got to worry about any industry-specific regulations. You've got to worry about DEP and EPA regulations. You've got tax code considerations. You've got, oh, my goodness, and you've got Pennsylvania Human Relations Commission. You've got the EEOC. Who else have you got? Oh, you've got the local tax collector. You've got the... who else you got to worry about? I don't know. Maybe I'm running out. Maybe that was the exhaustive list of all the things you have to take care of in order to be in business. And so it almost takes like 3 people to keep you in compliance. And, of course, if you only have 2 employees, you're 1 person short of what you need to make sure you're in compliance at all times. So I just see this as a coming increasing problem that is not going to go away anytime soon. I'm still getting tint questions. Somebody wants to know about a lawyer for tint. Window tint in Pennsylvania. Again, window tint in general, the government doesn't want you tinting your windows because if you tint your car windows, the government cannot see into your car. And that's what that's all about. Just remember that a lot of what they tell you, we don't want improper tint because it might obstruct a driver's vision. As you all know, you could mirror the front of your sunglasses then, and you can have your sunglasses so dark that people can't see your eyes. In lots of ways, they can't see through your sunglasses, but you can always see out from the other side. Well, it's the same with cars. But they don't want, I say they, I mean government, they don't want you to have privacy in your car because it all comes back to officer safety. They will tell you. What it really comes back to is government control. We can't have our facial recognition software looking through your windshield. We can't have our facial recognition software looking through your side view mirror or looking through your side window if you're allowed to tint it so we can't see in. That's, of course, then they have license plate readers now, et cetera, et cetera. But really, window tint has nothing to do with keeping the sun in or out as far as the government's concerned. It has everything to do with keeping the government's eyes on you. So I just always tell people you're never going to get very far with tint because government is not going to concede that one, and it's one that people don't seem to get very excited about. Unless, of course, you happen to be a person with tint on your car and the government's hassling you over it or beating you up over it. And then, of course, you do find it to be a problem. I once had tint on my driver's side window and my passenger side window. When the police pulled me over, I figured they were going to test my tint, so I just rolled my windows down. And then the officer asked me to roll the window up so he could test my tint, and I, of course, said no. And an hour and a half later, I was back on the road with my windows still down. But my point on that is, boy, they just love tint. Tint's one of those ones where when you can pull somebody over for tint, it gets you into the car. It lets the government get a free shakedown. And now, thanks to Pennsylvania Supreme Court decision, right? And if you go to Spreaker, you can listen to this one. This one's back just a little bit ago. Check it out if you want to know more about it. It basically says, hey, now that you're pulled over, if the police officer can articulate probable cause to search your car, he can. So here's what he goes. I thought I smelled the odor of marijuana. I thought I smelled, that's probable cause now. So they get to toss your whole car. Yep. Those illegal fireworks you brought back from Ohio, you're in trouble. Those 3 cases of cigarettes you have, you might have too many cases. You probably are now a cigarette bootlegger, and you're in trouble. Imagine that. It's just not good. It's just a bad combination. So it's all about the government getting into your life. It's all about the government stripping you of your rights, and that's what this decision was. It's Pennsylvania coming into conformity with the federal decisions, which were already stripping down your rights, saying you have a lowered expectation of privacy in your car. And they want to warrantlessly search your cell phone, and they want to warrantlessly look on your laptop, and they want to warrantlessly walk into your house. Because let me tell you something. If the government thought that they could win the case, if they thought that the Supreme Court of the United States would say the Fourth Amendment doesn't prevent warrantless searches of houses, trust me, they would ask for it, they would get it, and they would execute it daily. You cannot trust those bastards. Which goes back to my whole point. If you can't trust the congressman from all 50 states, you can't trust the president, you can't trust the courts either, best I can tell, with the decision on health care, for instance, finding that the individual mandate is constitutional because it's a tax, but it's not a tax such that the Anti-Tax Injunction Act applies because Congress meant for it to be a tax but didn't call it a tax, therefore they didn't mean for it to fall under the Anti-Tax Injunction Act. That opinion holding up the ACA, and I'm kind of rambling all over except to say that it all ties back together, was so disingenuous, so political, and John Roberts gave up the ghost, and God knows why. I still think the NSA or somebody got him in his pocket. Hey, we got some pictures of, you and a chipmunk, or we've got some pictures of your grandson and whatever, or who knows, but I just cannot believe that decision and the logic that was employed, and that's why I say I feel like you can't trust the Congress, you can't trust the president, and you can't trust the courts, which goes back to my whole thing I said at the beginning of the show, which is all you can ask for is due process, but boy, you're not going to be guaranteed a right result or a fair result or the result you deserve. That's why I have an intellectual problem with the death penalty. I don't have a problem with death penalty as a penalty. I have an intellectual problem with imposing it, knowing how inaccurate the legal system can be, and knowing how arbitrary juries' decisions can be, and knowing that so many innocent people have been freed from death row where they had good lawyers and the prosecutors were honestly believing they were guilty and the jury honestly believed they were guilty, but they weren't. And knowing how fraught with error our system is, I don't have a high level of confidence in the idea of putting somebody to death. And that's the same way I feel about the general gist of everything going on right now is, I've got the Solicitor General lying to the Supreme Court. I've got the Supreme Court using twisted logic to support the ACA. I'm just not sure it's the America that we want. But here's the good news. We have a ballot box. We have power. We have the ability. We can go forth and we can change it. And so I'm not going to just sit on my hands and complain. I'm going to kind of seek out as much information as I can and try to share it here, get you guys involved, take your calls, and we'll see where it all goes. Hopefully, we can make some meaningful change. What we want to change, I don't know. We're not going to all agree, I already know that many of you who I converse with on Facebook, we have very different views on a lot of different things. But I will tell you this, I will always respect your view. I may ridicule it, but I will always respect it. And that's important. As long as you believe what you believe in sincerity, you are worthy of and deserve respect. And I remember that about anybody else you disagree with as well. And it's okay to ridicule people. We don't have to all apologize all the time. And good discourse can get a little messy. So I don't apologize for ridiculing anybody, but I also don't do it in a mean-spirited way. I hope you understand that. I haven't yelled at any callers yet on this new format, but we may someday. But put it in your book, Sunday night, 6 to 9. We'll be back on the air, and we'll take your calls. Watch CarlRominger.com for updates and what's going on. And I'm going to wish you guys a good night and tell you God bless. Talk to you soon. See you later.